Today we're going to be doing a build video of the new JAMCRAFT trainer from JAMCRAFT RC. Before we get started, I want to give a brief shout out to Flight Test, who inspired me to do this type of video. Alright, now let's get started. Okay guys, before we get started on the build, I want to make sure we gather up some of the following tools. Some sandpaper, an X-Acto knife, this type of glue, preferably UHU pour, some 5-minute epoxy, and some blue painter's tape. Also, you might find handy a ruler. And then, of course, the contents of your kit. Now let's go ahead and get started. One of the first things you want to do is sand off the little tabs. I don't know if you'll see it on the camera, but there's little tabs on the outer edges of the foam. It's a good idea to just take some sandpaper and just sand these off. I'd recommend doing this on the entire airframe before even starting the build. Okay guys, so we're going to start with the construction of the wings. Now keep in mind the construction of the wings is probably the most complex part of the entire build. But keep in mind that with this added complexity, you get an actual airfoil and a really good wing that generates a lot of lift. So the first thing you want to do is lay out your wings, your two wings like so. Make sure that with each side of the wings, first of all, that there's a left and a right. I can't stress this enough. And also make sure that there's a top and a bottom half. Now what you'll want to go ahead and do is tape together the top half, or either side, it doesn't really matter, of the wing and use some blue painter's tape. Make sure to go all the way across and then just cut whatever is the excess tape. And again, I would just like to point out to make sure that there's both a bottom half and a top half for each wing, and a left and a right. For the left and the right, just make sure that the two wings oppose each other. And for the top and the bottom, make sure that bottom half, which can be identified by having two tabs, while the top half can be identified as having just one tab. Make sure that there's a bottom and then a top taped right to it. That's the first step we'll want to do. Okay, now that you've made certain that you have a left and a right wing that oppose each other, you'll want to go ahead and fold the wing over, like I've done here with the tape. So just fold it down and press down gently. And then take a ruler and make approximately a 45-degree cut along the top part right here and along the bottom here. Because what's going to happen is we're going to eventually fold these over, and the only way we can do that is if we have some sort of angle of cut in between. So we'll go ahead and just take an X-Acto knife and a ruler, and we'll go ahead and press our ruler down pretty firmly over the edge of a table. I'm going to scoot this over a little bit so I don't cut into my table here. And then what we're going to go ahead and do, just line this up carefully, and take our X-Acto knife and just cut like I'm doing here. And it might be a little bit hard to see, but it's very similar to the process you might do on Dollar Tree foam board, except here we're using tape instead of the paper that comes with the Dollar Tree foam board. And keep in mind this tape will eventually be removed. And that's why I'm having you use blue painter's tape versus any other types of tape, because blue painter's tape is extremely easy to remove from Depron. It doesn't leave any marks. So we're going to just flip the wing over and do the opposite side here. We'll now want to repeat this same process for the other wing. Okay, now we're going to move on to the fun part. We're going to start gluing our wing spar and wing ribs to the wing. First thing that you want to do is make sure that the bottom of the wing is facing you. It's just easier to work this way. And again, the bottom wing, the bottom half of the wing, is the part that has these two tabs. Okay, so what we're going to do is take our 6mm spar, and we're going to basically try to align it onto this part of the wing. Now, an important note, make sure the teeth, or the little gap, is facing up towards the sky. And then what we basically want to just do is press these into the little slots, and you should find that it fits perfectly. Now we can go ahead and glue this into place. Next we're going to glue our wing spars into place. So we're just going to basically find where each of these fit. And each of these two tabs is a different distance, so there's no way you can mess up this step. They are keyed in such a way that you can't really do it wrong. So just find out where each one fits, line them up, and then glue them into place. Okay, now that you've glued your wing ribs in place, we're going to go ahead and glue this piece into place with these funky little indents on. It goes right in the back towards the leading edge, right where the aileron connects. Also, another note, when I built the wing ribs and when I do this piece, it's a good idea to use some push pins to make sure everything fits nice and tight. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and glue this piece on. Okay, so once we've glued down our main wing spar, our wing ribs, and then that trailing edge aileron piece, we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the other wing. Now make sure that when you build it on the other wing, everything should be mirrored. It should be the exact opposite. Okay guys, now while we have the two wings drying, let's go ahead and do the construction of the ailerons. These can be a little bit tedious, but they're not too bad. Basically we'll want to take three pieces. This larger aileron rectangle, this slightly smaller one, and then this thinner one. Now we're going to start with the larger one, and we're going to just take it, and what we'll do is put a dab of glue all the way across one end, like so. Now an important note on the ailerons is do this entire process while the glue is still wet. You don't want to wait for it to dry in between steps, because that's going to mess it up. So we just put that drop of glue all the way across like that. Next what we'll want to do is take our really thin piece, and we're going to put it on at about 90 degrees so it's flush with the edge of this larger rectangle, like so. And just kind of fit it on there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Whatever little small errors there are, those can be corrected with sandpaper at the end, so just try to get it as good as you can. Okay, next what we want to do is put another drop of glue across this top surface again, and then across this surface. And what's going to happen is this smaller piece of the aileron is going to just join on, and this really thin piece is going to sort of tilt backwards. So tilt backwards like that to meet, so that it forms like a sort of a, I guess you could say, an acute triangle cross section. So we're going to go ahead and do that here. Okay, so now we're going to take our smaller, or I guess you should say medium-sized aileron rectangle, and we're just going to sort of start with this edge here. We're going to sort of push it on, and then we're going to kind of, as you can see, bend this piece to meet, well, we're going to bend this piece to meet this piece. So this can be a little bit tricky. Take your time. This glue doesn't dry very fast, so just get it as best you can. And it's working very well, as you can see. And don't worry about making it absolutely perfect, just get it the best you can. You can correct it later. Just make sure all the edges are pressed against each other pretty firmly. And there we go. Now we're going to put this off to the side, let it dry, and repeat the process for the other aileron. Alright guys, so now we're going to revisit the wings. The first thing I want to do, of course, is remove these push pins if you use them, which again I highly recommend. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is mount our servos. So the easiest way I found to do this is to simply take the servo head and bend it like so. Just manually move it over. And then this way we can continue to build the wing flat. We don't have to worry about a servo head sticking out the bottom. Now this is the positioning of the servo head, so take this into account. If this is the outer edge of the wing and this is the inner part that connects to the fuselage, we want the servo head to be, or excuse me, the servo would be like right here. Alright, let's go ahead and glue it into place. This next part is the fun part. Once you have your servos mounted, we'll go ahead and move on to the next step, which is to fold the top wing over the bottom part of the wing. Okay, so first thing to look out for is make sure you run your servo leads outside the wing at this point, because after this next step you won't be able to access it anymore. So, what we'll go ahead and do is lay our wing flat, and the goal here is basically to fold this over and join these tabs to the tabs that are in the tops, the upper part of the wing ribs and wing spar. The first thing we're going to want to do is take our UHU pour glue, and we're going to glue all the surfaces that are going to make contact with the top part of the wing except this middle crack. And what we're going to do with this middle crack is actually use 5-minute epoxy. I strongly recommend, actually would pretty much insist that you use 5-minute epoxy for that, because the UHU pour is not strong enough. Once we remove the tape, the UHU pour will it'll split apart. So you have to use 5-minute epoxy in that middle crack. Do that after you do the UHU pour, because the 5-minute epoxy dries quick. Alright, let's go ahead and do it. Make sure you spread very evenly the epoxy in this crack, because you don't want to have to, you want to make sure the whole surfaces are covered. Also, be sure to work kind of quickly on this step, because the epoxy will dry. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go ahead and fold this over. And we're going to start matching up kind of work towards the center and work outwards. We're going to match up this tab with this tab. And what we're going to do here is just sort of in a pulling motion, pull this top piece over while securely holding and kind of pushing a little bit on that bottom part, on that wing spar. And I'm just going to kind of work it. And this takes a little bit of patience. It's a little tedious, and this is for sure the most challenging part of the entire build. So if you can do this, you can build this plane. Just going to match everything up here. And this is where our push pins will come in handy. Kind of start push pinning stuff down. I'm getting there. Now I'm just sort of working it over on this side. Just kind of using this push pin here to kind of set it into this 6mm tab. I'm kind of just forcing it over a little bit to get it where I want it to be. Kind of manipulate the piece a little bit. Same with this. Just get it right where I want it, as close as I can get it. And that's just about it for this one. Okay, now you can see we have two beautiful wings. The next thing we're going to want to do is, of course, take the blue tape off. So we'll go ahead and do that. Just carefully peel it, kind of slowly, but doesn't need to be too slow. Just want to avoid damaging the surface of the foam. Alright, now we get two wings for the plane. They look really, really good. And of course, the carbon fiber spar will eventually slide right through into the wings and actually form dihedral for the wings. It's just fully integrated, which is really cool, but we'll get to that in a little while. Right now, let's move on to the construction of the fuselage. Alright, so now it's time to construct the fuselage. What we'll go ahead and do here is lay out one side of the fuselage. You can orient it either way. You can orient it like this or this. It doesn't really matter. But the only thing that does matter is to make sure when you go ahead and place these parts on the side of the plane, we'll go ahead and start with these fuselage formers that go vertically. Just make sure that the little gap, as you can see right there, make sure that's, again, facing up towards the sky. That's just the only important part to do here. Other than that, though, we're just going to go ahead and set these into place, and you'll just basically glue these down. They're all geared in such a way that they can only fit one way, so you really can't mess it up. Now that we've got the fuselage formers into place, we can go ahead and either do this, or we don't have to do this just yet. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually take my wood motor mount here, and I'm going to go ahead and glue it into place in the front of the side of the fuselage. Now, you don't have to do this yet. If you aren't sure what motor size you're going to use, I would just skip this step for now. But I know I'm going to be using this E-Flite Part 250 motor, and you'll notice that this has two little holes, the two little tabs where you can mount the motor. So you can mount it forward or you can mount it further back, just depending on which your needs are. I'm going to mount it further back because I'm using a motor mount. What we can go ahead and do now is take this piece right here, and we'll go ahead and take our little birchwood piece that's got the little diamond in the middle, and we'll go ahead and glue it to this piece, which is actually going to go in the center of the fuselage like so. So just find out which way the orientation of this piece is, and then go ahead and glue this onto the top so that it can be used. Basically what this is it's a hard point for to counteract your battery, so it's a good idea to go ahead and glue this in. So I'm going to take my UHU pour here, and I'm just going to glue it out. Next we'll go ahead and glue this into place. Next we'll go ahead and take the opposing half of the fuselage wall, and we'll go ahead and glue it into place. Okay guys, one last thing we can do on the fuselage here, before we go ahead and cover it, is put this top piece on right here, this front sort of windshield piece, and then this nose piece. We'll go ahead and glue those into place. And also before you do that, make sure if you're using this battery, this strap tape, or Velcro strap I should say, make sure you go ahead and put that in now because it'll be a little bit more difficult to access later. And yeah, then we'll go ahead and put a covering scheme on this. Hey guys, one other thing I forgot to mention here real quick is on the tail surfaces. What you want to, of course, do so that you can have a hinge is at the points where the where there's going to be a hinge. You want to take a ruler and do a 45 or so degree cut, slightly less than 45 degrees on the first side, And then again on the second side. Alright, now we have a new covering job in the airplane. This took about a day and a half to do, so it can take a little while if you want to do a good job, but it looks really good. It looks like a totally different airplane, but it's not. It's the exact same way it was before. So, what's really cool about this is it no longer even looks like a foam airplane. I mean, it looks like just a really high quality airplane with covering on it. I used microlight covering, but you can use any light film for this. Okay, now let's move on to control surface hinging. So, for hinging your surfaces, there's a few ways you can do this. You can do, if you want to go really simple, you could just do some tape. I'm not going to do that because I really am concerned for the finish of this model, so I don't want to just be putting tape on it. You could do ultracoat hinges if you know how to do that, or monocoat hinges. Or you could use actual hinges if you wanted to. What I'm going to do is this little trick that I have seen is actually make myself little hinges out of cardstock. So basically what I've done is just cut a bunch of little squares out of cardstock paper. Or you could actually use regular paper if you don't have cardstock, but I recommend cardstock. And basically what you'll do is hinge it just like you would a regular hinge. So you just take your surface, and before I get started I also want to mention we're going to start by hinging the elevator surfaces and the aileron surfaces, but don't do the rudder yet. You want to glue the rudder in place before you hinge it, and you'll see why in a sec. But to do this, basically, we'll take the center line of where the hinge is going to be, and we're going to basically make some incisions. So I'm going to do 4, 2 for each side on the elevator, and that's how we're going to go ahead and hinge it. We'll just glue them into place. We're going to cut a little incision right in the center of the hinge. Or of the control surface, I should say. And then basically what will just happen is we'll take our paper hinge and we'll put it, kind of jam it through, insert it in the middle here. And then we're going to do the same thing for the opposite, for the elevator. And then once the glue dries, you'll actually have a little hinge, which is really nice. Alright, now you can kind of see with the hinges in place how it kind of attaches to the elevator. So what we'll just do here is go ahead and take the elevator, which is already slotted. These are now dry. Wait for one side to dry before you put the other side in. And now we're just going to kind of fit the hinge into the slot. And we'll go ahead and do that right in front of the camera here. Just kind of move it back and forth till it wants to fit into the slot. And there we go. Now we would just wait for both hinges to dry, and you've got a really nice hinge line here for your elevator. It's the same deal for the aileron, except the one thing we want to pay attention to is where the hinge line actually is. On the rudder and on the elevator, it's dead center, but on the aileron, it's actually going to be on the top. So as you can see here, the hinges are actually where the right on the top of the aileron, where that's where it'll make contact. So if we were to go ahead and put it onto the aileron like so, it wouldn't be in the center, it'd be in the top. And this way we can get a nice hinge line on the top. And this is what a completed aileron will look like. Alright guys, now what we can go ahead and do is assemble the tail surfaces of the airplane. So the first thing I want to do is attach the horizontal stabilizer with the elevator hooked up to it now. And all you'll do is glue it onto the fuselage. I would recommend using 5-minute epoxy. The beauty of this is the fuselage actually makes a little shelf, and all you really do need to do here is set it on and let it dry. And just get it as even as you can. Just kind of inspect multiple angles to make sure it's all aligned properly. And then that's all you need to do. And once you glue this on, you can go ahead and take your vertical stabilizer, which should not have the rudder attached to it. If you did, then you'll have to take that off. What you want to do is just go ahead and put this on and just kind of put it through the little slot and just make sure it's aligned properly. And once you go ahead and do that, then we can move on to the next step. It's a good idea to round up your electronics if you haven't done so already. What we're going to do now is go ahead and mount the elevator and rudder servos. And those are going to go roughly towards the front of the fuselage to achieve the proper CG, but not too far forward. I'm going to go ahead and put them right about here. Now that those are in, we can go ahead and put on our control horns. Go ahead and do those for the elevator, rudder, and both ailerons at this point. Okay, you can see I have the control horns on all their respective control surfaces, And what I've also done is I've gone ahead and linked up the two ailerons. And what I did for that is I just used two Z-bends. I don't have any hardware or anything. But for the rudder and elevator, I'm going to go ahead and use this Depron micro push rod system. And we're going to use tubing and push rods and some hardware, and that's how we're going to achieve our linkages. There we go. Now all our linkages are installed. At this point, the rest of the build is pretty straightforward, so we'll go through it pretty quickly. But the next thing you'll want to do is go ahead and install your electronics. And when you do this, take into consideration the center of gravity. On this type of model, it's going to most likely be tail heavy, so you want to put your electronics as far forward as you possibly can at this point. First, we'll go ahead and mount our motor. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and mounted my motor, which is very basic, it just bolts onto the motor mount. And then I also installed the receiver and ESC using double-sided tape. Those just go in the front pocket, just make sure they're not interfering with the battery. Now the next thing we'll go ahead and do is put this bottom piece on to cover everything up. But before we do that, if we're going to use landing gear, let's go ahead and make that right now. Alright, so for the landing gear construction, the first thing you want to do obviously is make your actual landing gear. And there's a template provided in your kit that shows you how to do that. Nothing too tricky there. The next thing I want to go ahead and do is take your wooden piece with a little triangle in the middle and glue it onto the base piece and align the triangles. I would strongly recommend using 5-minute epoxy for this. Okay, now what I've done is I've gone ahead and attached the wheels to the landing gear. And for a little hub on the end of the wheels, I just used some hot glue so that the wheels don't come off. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and attach the landing gear to this bottom piece of the airplane. And there's two ways you can do this. The first way would be to tuck the landing gear through like this, and then glue it or attach it to this plate. And then that way nothing's on the bottom. Or the other way would be to just put it like this so everything's on the outside. And then it'll be easier to work on in the future if it breaks or anything. But the downside is it doesn't look quite as good. I'm going to go ahead and do the first method because I'm pretty confident I can secure it easily. So as far as securing it, what you'll want to do is, ideally, you'll get those, I think Depron makes some little brackets that you can use to mount landing gear to, or wire to wood, stuff like that. It just kind of screws on the side. But I don't have that with me, so I'm just going to go ahead and glue it with some 5-minute epoxy, and I'm going to attach it with this tape. I'm just going to wrap around a few times, kind of like a mummy, and it'll be really strong. I'm confident that that won't ever break. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we go. Now we have a strong yet lightweight landing gear assembly. Now we'll go ahead and glue this onto the plane and then cover it. One other note, guys, that I should have mentioned earlier. Before you glue this piece on the bottom, you'll want to run your aileron leads from your receiver and out through this little hole here, if you can see that, so that it can connect to the ailerons and the wings. Now I didn't do that, and the glue's already dried, so I'm going to have to, it's going to be a little tricky, but you're definitely going to want to run those leads through before you glue this piece on. Now what I've done here is I've put the bottom piece and I've attached it to the plane and I've covered it. And then what I also went ahead and did is I made myself a little hatch for the battery. And the way I did that is I just simply cut it out with an X-Acto knife, taped one side to make a little door, and then I used this little thing here called a hatch latch, which I bought from Depron. Depron's got all sorts of great stuff for these little models, so go and check that out. You could also use magnets, or you could just use some tape. And basically the way this works is I just pull this little spring and pull this little tab, and now I can access all my internals, which is really cool. Alright, and the final step now is to glue the wings together and go ahead and attach them. Alright, at this point, assembling the wings should be really easy. All we're going to do is load some 5-minute epoxy on the hole where the carbon fiber rod intersects, and then we're going to push the carbon fiber rod through. Then we'll go ahead and push it through the other wing, and we'll go ahead and load some glue, or some 5-minute epoxy, on the inner part of the wings and glue them together. We'll want to assemble the wings like this before we glue it onto the fuselage. Also, before you glue it onto the fuselage, once this is dry, make sure you attach your aileron leads. You don't want to forget that step. So one other thing worth mentioning, for those of you who use covering film like I did, is to go ahead and cut little slivers off of the covering film on the wing and on the fuselage so that just bare Depron is exposed. And the reason for this is because the 5-minute epoxy here is much better to Depron than it does to film. So go ahead and do that. And then also, go ahead and place your wing on top of your fuselage about where you're going to set it, because you want to make sure it has a nice snug fit. In my case, I had to sand the front just a little bit so that it fit really tight. Now it's time to go ahead and glue it. So I'm just spreading the 5-minute epoxy nice and evenly. Try to get all the spots on the surface, because there's not a ton of surface area, so you want to make sure you get as much glue as you can. Now we'll just take our wing and we will kind of set it into place. And work pretty quickly, because the 5-minute epoxy, as you know, dries fast. And just press it down. Get the wing nice and even to the vertical stabilizer, or horizontal stabilizer, excuse me. And to the vertical stabilizer. Alright guys, this airplane is done. I went ahead and put a little bit more covering film up underneath the wing to fill that spot that I had cut out when I put the wings on. And the last and final step, and probably the most important step, is to go ahead and balance your airplane. And in my case, it's pretty well balanced. It's ever so slightly tail heavy. That's pretty normal on this airplane. Just put a little bit of modeling clay up in the front, and I'm going to put it right in that chamber formed by the motor mount. That's a perfect spot for some clay. And I didn't add a tail wheel on this plane. You could do that, I just don't like the unnecessary tail weight, so I'll probably just put a little skid or something in the back. But other than that, the airplane's done. And you can see we've got flight controls, and we've got power. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Go to JAMCRAFT RC if you'd like to place an order for this airplane. And also, any feedback or comments or questions are greatly appreciated, and you can email me. The link will be put on my website. So thanks guys for watching. Let's go ahead and fly.